Vaccination is one of the most powerful weapons that doctors have against infectious diseases. Vaccines are now available which can protect people against a wide variety of dangerous infections, including measles, polio, cholera and typhoid. But what's in a vaccine that makes it so good at preventing disease? A vaccine contains a weakened form of the disease it's designed to prevent. It may sound strange to inject someone with a form of a disease in order to protect them against that disease, but it makes sense when one realises how the body normally protects itself against infection. Many infectious diseases occur only once during a person's lifetime. The reason for this is that the body's natural protection, the immune system, can often recognise an infection it has seen before and is ready to fight off an invading virus or bacterium the next time the same germ appears. As John Newell of the BBC Science Unit explains, it's as if the immune system has a memory.
After the body has been exposed to one infection and the immune system has reacted by recognising and destroying that infection, some of the white blood cells of the immune system, which performed the recognition and led the attack on the invading force, remain in circulation, and they and their descendants remain in circulation for a long time, sometimes for the person's entire lifetime, usually for years at least, and that gives the immune system a memory of what that invader looked like and what had to be done to destroy it, so that if another invasion of the same kind takes place, it takes a much shorter time to mobilize really effective defenses and to repel the invasion.
The idea of a vaccination is to give the body this protective memory without it actually having the disease. So vaccination is a safe way to introduce our body to a disease and give it the memory of a disease without us having to catch the disease itself.
A vaccine imitates the first infection, which is required for the immune system to learn to recognize a particular infection. So a vaccination gives the immune system the learning and the memory of a certain infection, which otherwise it could only acquire by the real thing, which of course would be severe, dangerous and possibly fatal.
Vaccines can protect people against diseases by imitating infections, but they aren't dangerous or fatal because they contain weakened forms of the disease. In this way, they are realistic enough to fool the body into thinking it's been infected without making the person ill. John Newell.
What happens is that you give someone's body a dead or weakened virus or bacterium, or just a small part of a virus or bacterium which is still enough to be recognized as coming from that infectious organism. And this harmless bit of the organism, or this harmless dead or weakened organism, is treated by the immune system as if it was a complete, live, dangerous virus or bacterium. It is recognized as foreign, and the whole of the body's defenses, the whole of the immune system is mobilized so that in future, for years ahead, often for the person's whole life, if a real live infection comes along, the whole of a defensive army will be there waiting. The real live infection will be immediately recognized as what it is and as dangerous, and it will be repelled before it can establish a beachhead.
This way of giving harmless forms of a disease has made modern vaccination a safe and effective way to prevent many serious infections. But there are some occasions when vaccinations should be used with great care, or shouldn't be used at all. Some types of vaccines shouldn't be given during pregnancy because they can sometimes affect the developing baby. And it's not sensible to give vaccines to people whose immune systems are weakened by a disease or some types of drug treatment. Serious unwanted effects from vaccines are extremely rare, but occasionally vaccines can cause soreness at the site of injection and a slight fever or a flu-like illness lasting for 1 or 2 days. But in general, the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks of getting the disease itself. Dr. Anne Hardy from the Wellcome Institute in London is an expert on the history of vaccines.
Although very occasionally some of these vaccines do have side effects, there can be no doubt that overall the benefits conferred by vaccination programs far outweigh the hazards to the individual. This is particularly the case with vaccines like those for poliomyelitis and for measles, where the risks of death and disablement from the disease itself are far, far greater than any risks associated with the vaccine.
Modern vaccines are generally safe, but the earliest vaccines were not so harmless. Nowadays, weakened forms of the disease are used in vaccines, but the first attempts at vaccination used the disease itself, a technique called inoculation. As Dr. Anne Hardy explains, inoculation against the disease smallpox probably started in China hundreds of years ago.
Inoculation had been practiced in China and the Near East for many centuries, but it was brought to Europe by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu in the early 18th century. She was the wife of the English ambassador to Turkey at this time and had herself been badly scarred by smallpox as a child. She discovered the practice when her own small boy was introduced to it in Turkey, and she learnt how to do it and transmitted this information back to Europe when her husband returned from his tour of duty in Turkey. Thereafter, the practice of inoculation spread widely throughout Europe, but there were drawbacks to this procedure because inoculation induced a case of active smallpox in whoever had been inoculated, and for several weeks thereafter the patient was infectious, and this meant that he or she could transmit the disease to other people, and these people sometimes caught very severe and fatal smallpox as a result.
Despite its drawbacks, inoculation did provide some useful protection against disease. But the technique could only be used against the disease smallpox, and doctors didn't fully understand why inoculation worked. The important step came in 1796, when an Englishman called Edward Jenner discovered the more advanced technique of vaccination against smallpox.
Now, Jenner was a country doctor working in Gloucestershire, and he became aware in the course of his practice that the local people claimed to be immune to smallpox because they had had cowpox, which is a variant of the pox virus which affects cows. And the local farmers and milkmaids claimed to have had cowpox and to be immune to smallpox. And Jenner, being interested in this, decided to follow it up and to experiment, and he succeeded in demonstrating medically to his own satisfaction and to the satisfaction of his medical colleagues that this was indeed the case, and that the virus of cowpox, when injected under the skin, would protect human beings against smallpox.
Jenner's idea of using the cowpox virus, which is harmless to humans, to protect people against a similar virus, smallpox, was the beginning of vaccination as we know it today. It meant that people could be protected against smallpox without ever having the disease itself. But it took a while before his idea was accepted.
He got initially a moderately hostile reception, one has to say that. But within a very few years, he had succeeded in demonstrating the effectiveness of the procedure. And as early as 1803, the British government was accepting the validity of the procedure and encouraging people to have themselves vaccinated against smallpox.
Although it was some time before smallpox vaccination was accepted in Britain, other countries were quicker to adopt the technique. Anne Hardy.
Other countries in Europe were much more positive at an earlier stage about smallpox vaccination. In France and in Germany, national programmes of vaccination against smallpox were instituted in the early decades of the 19th century. In Britain, vaccination against smallpox remained voluntary for a very long time, and it was only in 1863 that legislation was introduced to compel parents to have their small children vaccinated against smallpox.
Over the years, Jenner's vaccination technique became accepted across the world. But it wasn't until long after he had died that his discovery eventually led to an announcement by the World Health Organization that smallpox had been completely eradicated. Dr. Hardy.
Although Jenner did live to see vaccination against smallpox become widely accepted in his lifetime, he would have welcomed the final eradication of smallpox, which was achieved over 150 years later in 1977.
Not only did Jenner's technique lead to the eradication of smallpox, but it allowed scientists to develop vaccines against a whole range of other diseases. These are now used to protect both individuals and whole populations against infectious diseases.
Vaccination programs are very much benefit the whole population as well as the individual. And this is where there has been a continuing tension between individuals who do not wish to be vaccinated and the state who wish that individuals should be vaccinated for the greater good.
Vaccines have already achieved a great deal, but it's likely that with new technologies which can make effective vaccines from genetic material or DNA, vaccines will be even more useful in years to come. John Newell.
I think the new technologies which are making it possible to make vaccines by genetic engineering and vaccines composed only of DNA are expanding and will greatly expand the scope for vaccination, especially in the developing world. And I think it is vitally important that the resources should be found to make this technology available where it can do most good in the developing world, because a vaccination will very often protect a child against a disease for life. A drug of any kind will cure a child once, but very, very often, and especially in the poorest countries, they are re-exposed to infection again within a day or two.